I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the ongoing war on journalism in Pakistan and the intelligence agency that stands accused of putting the media in its crosshairs. Eastern Ukraine is another assignment reporters might want to think about. Getting abducted there is now part of the risk.
Well, they said that basically I'm a lying journalist, and that's why I was there.
Two of Britain's best-known political cartoonists on the art of satire, and a tribute to the invisible hand behind all that you see. The video editor. That's our web video of the week. Another Pakistani journalist went to the hospital this past week with bullet wounds. Hamid Mir, a television anchor, was shot 6 times as he left the Karachi airport in his car. And the case has since turned into a showdown between Mir's employer, GOTV, and the Pakistani intelligence service, the ISI. Mir himself, his family, and Geo have all implicated the ISI in the shooting. The agency has since complained to Pakistan's broadcast regulator, which has the power to shut Geo down. And several other news outlets, rather than backing Geo, have criticized the channel for incriminating the intelligence service without providing the proof. Hamid Mir, who we've interviewed here on The Listening Post before, is one of the most prominent journalists in Pakistan. And this is not the first time that the ISI has been accused of going after someone who was reported critically on it. The ISI and the Taliban are the rock and the hard place of Pakistani journalism. Do too much digging on either organization and you can get squeezed. Our starting point this week is Karachi. In a country where almost 700 people were killed in suicide bombings last year, another 199 were killed in drone strikes, and there were 14,000 cases of murder. An attack on a single journalist who happened to survive might seem less than newsworthy.
Geo News के एंकर पर्सन और सीनियर सहाफी हामिद मीर पर.
However, the shooting of Hamid Mir seems tied into those suicide bombings and those drone strikes, because those are the kinds of stories on extremism and what the government was doing about it that he was reporting on.
Hamid Mir is arguably the most popular journalist in Pakistan right now, and has been, you can say, the king of television journalism for the last decade in the country. He has a show on Geo Television which is called Capital TV, and his show has topped the ratings chart for years as well. But he's been labeled a Taliban sympathizer and a CIA agent, both, for the kind of positions that he's taken.
In the last few years, he had taken a very fiercely independent line, particularly on the insurgency in Balochistan, where he accused the security agencies of harassing local population. So he got into a direct confrontation with the military.
अगर तुम वाकई इस मुल्क के सजीले जवान हो, तो हिम्मत पैदा करो, खुल के सामने आओ और मर्द की तरह आके हम पर इल्जाम लगाओ.
But other than that, he was generally speaking against terrorism.
लेकिन जो दहशतगर्द हैं, उन्होंने वज़ीर दाखिला के दावे को गलत साबित करने के लिए इस्लामाबाद के बिल्कुल वस्त में एक हमला किया.
So I suppose his attack is also linked to the same kind of general body of threats that the journalists face.
We can only speculate, and we can only attribute to what Hamid Mir used to say before he came under attack. So he had named certain outfits, certain elements from within the government setups, and also the militant side. So he was aware of the possibility of attack being mounted from these two sides. He took very strong positions. It was not just reduced to mere reporting. He took positions on that, and that must have annoyed a number of people.
18 months ago, a bomb was planted under Mir's car. It failed to detonate, but the Taliban claimed responsibility for the failed bombing. In response, it said, to Mir's coverage of the group's attack on Malala Yousafzai, the teenage education rights activist. This time, the finger has been pointed at the intelligence service, the ISI. Mir's brother, who is also a journalist, went on Geo TV saying the victim had predicted the ISI would go after him.
अपनी ज़ात को किसी नुकसान की सूरत में ISI और उनके DG लेफ्टिनेंट जनरल ज़हीरुल इस्लाम को नॉमिनेट किया हुआ है कि अगर
His channel, Geo, took that theory and ran with it.
जनरल ज़हीर की जगह होता तो मैं अपने आप को स्टेप डाउन करता.
Later, Hamid Mir issued a statement saying, I had been facing threats from both state and non-state actors, and that in the current situation, I felt the most immediate threat from the ISI. The government has formed a judicial inquiry into who was behind the Mir shooting. However, Pakistani journalists have little reason to believe that justice, in this case or in any case involving attacks on journalists, will ever be done. According to Amnesty International, since the restoration of democracy in 2008, at least 34 Pakistani journalists have been killed as a direct consequence of their work. There has been just one conviction in the case of GOTV correspondent Wali Khan Babar, who was shot dead in 2011. According to the police, Babar's murderers had links to the MQM, a regional secular movement which has strongly denied any involvement. The other 33 cases of journalists killed, many of whom were reporting on the ISI or the Taliban, remain unsolved.
We have seen there have been probes and judicial commissions which have been set for other journalist murder as well, and nothing have really come out of it. Like, say for example, in Salim Shahzad's case, who was allegedly tortured to death by the intelligence agencies. The judicial commission which was set up could not really come up with who exactly carried out the attack. We can't really hope much in this situation because a judicial commission is still a very sophisticated way or a complicated way of going about it.
The second reason, of course, is the problems with Pakistan's criminal justice system itself. The courts and the prosecution, unfortunately, they have not been reformed. You don't have enough prosecutors in the country, and the court procedures are extremely archaic. And now if you add this in media war and this floundering and meltdown of journalistic ethics and complete disunity in their ranks, impunity is going, that's what I foresee in the short term. I don't see it changing.
And there is disunity in the ranks of the media. The Express News Group, which has had 3 of its employees killed this year alone, reportedly by the Taliban, and had its offices shot at and hit by grenades, went after GOTV for its coverage of the Mir story, for incriminating the ISI without backing that allegation up with any real evidence.
It's become a bloody joke. Once again, Geo Television and its allied companies, primarily Junk and News, have overstepped many lines because an accusation must be made with certain evidence. Everything is a big maybe till the time there's a court of law that comes out with a definitive answer. And I think jumping to judgments before that is definitely not on.
It was not just that we reported the allegation leveled by the brother of victim Hamid Mir. We also took a version of the military spokesman and we gave a prominent display to what they say. They call it rubbish, and we reported that also. But at the same time, since the victim had made a statement before he was shot at, so we needed to be honest about it.
The differences between GOTV and the Express Group do not come down to simple ideology. They are also commercial rivals, fighting for revenues in a media market that has exploded in size since 2000, when the country had just 2 television channels, including the state-owned PTV.
Gradual liberalization started in the late 80s, and then by early 2000s, the electronic media industry was deregulated. Now you have these 90+ channels which have emerged as a huge public voice, also a huge means of accountability of the executive and the state. But there are certain lines drawn where you cannot question those things.
Along with it came a boom in the media, and many people opted to come to the media, not for the spirit of news, but to gain an advantageous position in the society. Now you have television stations run by retired former Secret Service people, run by corporate people, and they are very prone to influences from the government and other institutions.
That is where the Pakistani media find themselves in 2014. One news organization implicating the intelligence service in the attempted murder of a renowned journalist. Another media group, itself under repeated attack by the Taliban, coming to the government's defense. Hamid Mir might have put it best when we interviewed him a year ago on the complications and the dangers of covering the security story in Pakistan.
That Taliban and Pakistani security agencies, they are enemies of each other, they fight with each other. Yes, in some cases it's true, but in most of the cases, we know that they collaborate with each other. At least against the media, they are one. So we are in the crossfire.
Our Global Village voice is now on the risks and the red lines of reporting the story in Pakistan.
It is very hard to remain impartial in Pakistan because of the fact that there are threats from the military, the militancy, and the government. Hamid Mir's case, each media body is pitted against each other, and they are saying that you should not name the ISI and you should name the ISI. So there is a lot of divisions among the media and also a lot of self-censorship, which leads to the reporting from the country being not the complete truth.
When you're reporting about such dangerous issues, you need to be careful. If any information has been shared off the record, then you must not use it. The military and its spy agency is one institution that has not learned how to take criticism positively. But journalists in Pakistan are very courageous. They're reporting from conflict areas, sometimes even putting their lives in danger. And we need to respect that. There's a small joke in the journalist community, and it says that a dead reporter cannot report. So it's always better to save your life first.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. There was always the chance that the media side of the conflict in Ukraine would turn ugly. And we're seeing that now, with journalists abducted and in one case paraded in front of the cameras. Irma Krat is usually based in Kiev but traveled to Slavyansk in eastern Ukraine to cover the growing breakaway movement there. She was abducted by pro-Russian separatists. And on April 20th, an internet TV channel, Life News, broadcast footage of Krat being held by armed men who accuse her of committing war crimes, presumably over her journalism during the anti-Russian protests in Kiev. Another journalist, Simon Ostrovsky of Vice TV in the U.S., was also abducted at a checkpoint outside that same city. Ostrovsky, who's also done some work for us here at the Listening Post, is an American, fluent in Russian, who's been reporting on Ukraine for months now. At an earlier press conference, the self-declared mayor of Slavyansk said that they had detained Ostrovsky to prevent him from making provocative comments. Local media are reporting that several journalists remain captive in eastern Ukraine. For the second time in a month, some journalists kidnapped in Syria have been set free under circumstances that seem destined to remain unclear. The four Frenchmen, Nicolas Hénan, Pierre Torres, Edouard Ilias, and Didier Francois, were abducted in two separate incidents 10 months ago. The radical group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, is suspected to have taken them. French President François Hollande insisted that no ransom had been paid, and the Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius strongly denied that the men had been traded for a shipment of weapons. It's the same group that last month released two Spanish journalists who had been held for 6 months. Many media organizations do not reveal if their people have been kidnapped in order to facilitate negotiations. They're loath to confirm if any ransom is ever paid for fear of provoking more kidnappings. 10 months after Edward Snowden blew the whistle on American spies and the surveillance state, those working in U.S. intelligence have been warned. Unauthorized contact with journalists is now a fireable offense. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, has told employees that under the new rules, even if workers don't pass on classified information to journalists, they would commit a security violation just by being in contact with them. The wide definition of media in this directive includes not only traditional journalists, but also bloggers and activists who inform the public about intelligence activity. Jesselyn Radak of the Government Accountability Project in Washington took a run at the new policy and the official behind it. This latest action, she said, is a clear extension of the executive branch's war on national security whistleblowers. It is a grotesque twist for James Clapper to limit public knowledge about government activity when he himself has been responsible for lying to Congress and misleading the public about the government's overreaching mass surveillance programs. Political cartoons can be a serious business, and if you don't believe that, just Google Denmark 2006 cartoon and the Prophet Muhammad. The job description of a political cartoonist must include some kind of section on exposing the pretense and hypocrisy of those in public life and playing it all for laughs. Sometimes, though, that can get them into trouble, and the profession itself could well be in danger as the digital age renders its output outmoded, or at the very least sends cartoonists scrambling in search of new platforms. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on two of Britain's best-known cartoonists, Gerald Scarfe of the Sunday Times and Steve Bell of The Guardian.
They've been known to incite protest, rally the masses, even help bring down dictators. The editorial cartoon, the painting of a political picture in broad brushstrokes, can be funny, but the subject matter often is not.
The political cartoon is an immediate opinion. Of course, we have people who write opinions in newspapers, but you've got to wade through a couple of thousands of words. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, I'm not sure if that's true, but you know, that is the thing, that a cartoon can hit you smack in the eye like that. When you open the paper, there it is.
Cartooning is about illustration, very much. It's about visualizing, it's about getting to grips with the, this flood of imagery we get more and more these days. I start here and I think about what's going on, what I've been hearing on the news, what's current. It's entirely down to me to decide, and the difficult thing is to try and think of a way to do a cartoon around it.
Meet The Guardian's Steve Bell and his Sunday Times counterpart, Gerald Scarfe. Combined, these two satirists have produced almost 100 years of cartoons, drawing controversy, using the power of the pen to expose both the politicians and the politics of the day. Are they on the same page? Not literally, but they're often on the same topic.
I work on the Sunday Times. That's really only once a week that I have to be thinking about a political idea. I only really have one crack a week at, whereas Steve has, you know, 3 or 4 goes at something. He does a lot more work than me and he puts in a lot more hours, but he has more of a palette to work from at the end of the week. Many of the ideas have been done by my compatriots, so I've got to think again. By the time it gets to Thursday or Friday, I should have something kind of bubbling away in my mind, and at the moment it might be Syria, the Ukraine obviously, and I suppose Obama and Putin are always arm wrestling with one another in one east-west situation. Those sort of things go through my mind, but I don't actually do anything about it. And when an idea comes to me, I just sort of plunge it onto the paper immediately.
My approach is very different to Scarfe's. Everything he does is about that size. He stands at the table and hurls the think about. Me, I'm like this. Everything I do is about that size, and it's much more tightly controlled. Because what I do, I'm a comic artist. I do comic strips, essentially, and even the bigger cartoons are actually just like a bigger frame of a comic strip. There's a completely different aesthetic going on. Also, I have far more slots. I have 8 a week, he has 1. The thing about drawing cartoons in paper, it's actually a very simple process. It's me, I do it, and I send it in, and it goes in the paper. Obviously, there is editorial remediation. If I do something naughty, or use too many bad words, or there might be a problem with libel.
An apology and a rap on the knuckles might be the only repercussion for cartoonists working in some countries, but in others, cartoons can be explosive. You don't even need to be the one drawing them. Just last month, 2 Libyan politicians were facing the death penalty for using a cartoon in their election campaign deemed insulting to Islam. Their sentences were commuted, both were fined. Back in August 2011, Syrian cartoonist Ali Fazat didn't get off so lightly. He was victimized for satirizing Bashar al-Assad, an attack that was as vicious as it was symbolic. His hands were broken, his pen silenced. Other cartoonists, even those not working in oppressive circumstances, have received death threats, lawsuits, jail sentences, all for leaving their mark. And that's because people in positions of privilege understand and fear the potent mix of power and punditry that flows from the cartoonist's pen.
If you can make a world leader look ridiculous, then that's much more powerful to use humour to bring them down than to show them with sort of dripping fangs of blood. It belittles them more. To be laughed at is probably one of the most deflating things. If you think that a person is a tyrant and you're frightened of them and they instill that fear in you, then they are still powerful. But if you make them look like a buffoon, then power evaporates.
Cartoons are essentially caricatures, a word that comes from the Italian caricare, meaning to load or exaggerate. And that's exactly what they do. They exaggerate their subjects for comic effect. Serious political cartooning got its start centuries ago in Italy. By the early 18th century, William Hogarth had given the style a very British flavour. His satirical series are seen as a forerunner to the modern comic strip. And you can draw a straight line between Hogarth's work then and what Steve Bell does at The Guardian today. almost 300 years later.
The sort of rich tradition of things like Hogarth, it's the sort of thing you are dimly aware of, but when you start doing it, obviously then you take a much greater interest, and of course the more I've been doing it, the more interested I become in them and see how marvellous they are and what an amazing precedent they set.
A tradition with a lot of history. But what about a future? British newspaper cartooning seems to be the preserve of a group of men in middle to late age, surrounded by stacks of paintbrushes and pen pots, rather than laptops and tablets. When these men finally put down their pens, will there be a new generation of political cartoonists waiting to pick up where they left off?
It's quite a sort of weird and obscure and rare skill. Not many people want to do it, actually, but there are some really good people coming up, young people, young cartoonists, younger than me anyway.
Let's hope that there'll be newspapers for them to work in. I think the death of newspapers probably is threatening to cartoonists. When you think I'm in the newspaper and I'm fighting against headlines, I'm fighting against advertisements, fighting against brilliant photographs, it's my job really to try and capture the reader as he turns the page and arrest their attention, and and try and make my point as quickly and hard and simply as I can.
It's told as if a tale whereby newspapers are dying. I think that's overplayed. There will always be a need to have something in your hand to look through, to read, to laugh at, to pore over, which you can't do with a screen, you can't do with a tablet.
And that is one thing, maybe the one thing, that newspapers still have over other media. The cartoon, that in a single image and a very few words can say it all.
More Global Village voices now on the art of political cartooning.
Using hard-hitting satire is not without its risks, and many cartoonists around the world have faced and continue to face repercussions because of what they published. Cartoonists have hardly any organizations that will protect their rights. Cartoonists are usually not considered journalists. They work freelance outside the newspaper and usually do not belong to any professional organization. This makes them an easy target, and considering the important role they fulfill within journalism, I think we owe them the protection they need to do their work.
It is not like that we are pushing boundaries. Boundaries are already pushed by the powerful and rich people and by the politicians. We are fighting against the powerful people, so we must get protected. If we need a clean and liberal and open society, we must protect a cartoonist.
Finally, everything you've seen on this program, every frame of video, has been put together by our editor. Most people don't really know what he does, but without him, this show does not exist. He can be a bit grumpy because he doesn't get out much. He sits in a dark room all week collecting footage, images, scripts, voiceovers, pieces to camera, puts them all in a timeline, then makes all those elements look good and make sense. Now, we thought about putting together a tribute to him, but we just went online and borrowed one instead. A company called Inside the Edit puts editing tutorials up on the web, and we've made this one our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.